It's a landmark study. Now, the author of this report, Xi Chen, joins me live from Beijing to shed more light on his findings. And, sir, thank you for joining us here in the program. We already knew air pollution is bad for our lungs, but our brains as well. Now, what prompted you and your team to investigate this issue?
Kristie, thanks for having me. So we look at many individuals over a full period of time about their test scores as a result of air pollution, both short-term and long-term. And we try to complement previous studies that only look at narrowly defined health effects. As we know that cognition is one of the most important dimensions of human capital, which is also an important engine of economic growth. So if there's a big impact of environmental stressors on cognition, cognitive decline, then that will suggest the governments need to even strengthen or tightening the environmental policies. So we need to recover the hidden costs there as a result of air pollution.
Absolutely. And I could also imagine that there are just horrified parents around the world, you know, in Mexico City, in New Delhi, in Beijing, and elsewhere who are concerned about this study. But who is the most vulnerable? Is it older adults who are more affected, or children, younger people?
Yeah, great question. So we find that the effect towards the older adults are the most severe, especially older men who receive less education. And for the young children, the effect is smaller, but still very significant. And as they accumulate more pollutants over when they are growing up, the effect will get stronger. So that's very worrisome, because if you only have a short-term effect, you can wear a face mask or install air filter to avoid the exposure. But if it is long-term, then the public policies need to really address this issue by cleaning the air.
You mentioned that older men are more vulnerable to the negative cognitive effects of air pollution. You also mentioned, you know, those who are less wealthy are very vulnerable, and presumably that's because they're forced to work outdoors and hence they have more exposure. Could I ask a different follow-up question about Alzheimer's and dementia and other mental health diseases of this kind? Could they be the result of long-term exposure to air pollution?
Yes, that's a great question. As we know that dementia and Alzheimer's disease, they are very costly. This will drive up the healthcare cost a lot. And there's growing evidence in the medical literature showing that long-term exposure to air pollution may affect the chance of having the dementia. And because, especially for small particulate matter, they can transmit through the air and go directly into the blood vessel or into the brain. There are some evidence showing that. Which will change the chemistry in the brain and have long-term consequences on neurodegenerative diseases, such as dementia.
This is very alarming stuff. And Xi Chen, you and your colleagues at Yale School of Public Health, as well as at Peking University, you're warning the world about it. So what should we do? You know, how do we fight the negative cognitive effects of bad air and air pollution?
So I think the government should take stronger measures, but I think in a lot of countries, such measures, policies are still very loosened. For example, recently in the Trump administration in the U.S., they relaxed the environmental policy. They relaxed the fuel efficiency standard for automobiles, and also they released the emission standard for the coal-burning power stations, which is very alarming because that will flood American communities with very dangerous pollutants. So the government needs to take action. But one thing very special for air pollution is that there's no border for pollution. So you cannot build a wall to avoid being affected. So there should be the global action, to take global action to address that as an important global health issue. And we know that every one every 9 deaths every year in the world is because of air pollution. And this should be one of the things that can be avoided, like air pollution and
Very,
smoking.
very well said. Yeah, Xi Chen, very, very well said. You cannot build a wall to contain pollution. This is a global crisis. Thank you so much for joining us here on the program. Xi Chen joining us live from Beijing. He's with Yale University. We got more Newsstream coming right after this.